We're going to be talking about time management and motivation. When I ask students what the thing is they need the most help with in order to be successful in college, the answer is most often time management. And I think part of this is because in our society we have huge amounts of demands on our time. Everyone is super busy all the time, and there are a lot of things like Facebook and Instagram and other social media, and then of course Netflix and a variety of other things that take a lot of our time and make it a little bit harder to focus on things like our education and our work. So we're going to look at some strategies to help manage this. And obviously it's something that you have to take on and you have to implement, but there are a variety of tips and approaches that may help you in making sure that your time is focused on what you really care about, which is getting your education. For this lecture, you're going to want to have the time wasters assessment and the scheduling a big project handouts printed out. And there's going to be some videos for you to watch, of course. Have those lecture links available so that you can watch the videos. We're going to start with some videos on motivation and productivity. Please watch the ASAP Science videos. The TED Talk is optional, but it is very interesting and gives you some great tips on motivation. We're looking at motivation because many students find it hard sometimes to be motivated in some of their classes that they may not be interested in, but they have to take. So these will allow you to explore some tips for helping you increase your motivation, both finding intrinsic motivation, which means being motivated from internal goals instead of somebody telling you to do something, or being motivated by money or grades, and a variety of other tips that I think are really important to help you understand how to get yourself motivated in an academic environment. Then I want you to take some time to think about how the scientific studies discussed in these videos relate to education and how you might use them to help you stay motivated. So we're going to transition to talking about time and time management. Unfortunately, we only have 168 hours in a week, and we can't get any more time. But what we can do is to really plan and schedule our time in a way that we can get the most out of the time that we do have. And I'm going to provide you some tips and tools in order to do that. So now you've explored concepts related to motivation. Motivation is very closely connected to time management because we are trying to decide how to apply our time. And if we're not motivated to work on our studies, we're going to apply our time in a different way. So we're going to explore some approaches to time management that hopefully will help you. But first, we're going to start with looking at why we aren't better at time management. Many of us waste a lot of time that we could be using for things we care more about, like our education, for example, or our family or our friends. And it's kind of confusing as to why we do that. First of all, one of the reasons is planning seems like work. Actually creating a schedule or a to-do list seems like you're adding to your list of things that you have to accomplish. It does also create structure and accountability, which for some folks, they feel like they have enough of that at school or at work, and it feels like adding more of that is a little bit stifling. Time management also forces you to look at what needs to be completed. So sometimes denial feels really good. You don't have to look at your to-do list, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. But that's not ideal because, of course, then you have things that you're supposed to get done or things that you need to get done in order to be successful, and they don't get done. Even though it's uncomfortable to look at your list and you probably don't want to do it, you still need to be aware of what needs to be completed. For some people, it's not fun to do time management work, to do scheduling, to make sure they have their calendar updated. For other people, they may enjoy it, but it's not exactly, a walk in the park for some people. You may not care enough. You may be in a class you don't like and not really care about it and not want to schedule it, or you might be in school because somebody told you to be in school. So this relates to motivation really closely, because if you don't really care about what you're doing, it's very difficult to get yourself to sit down and create a schedule. Sometimes the answer to why you don't manage your time is just, I don't feel like it. It's not something that is, immediately gratifying. So you don't want to sit down and take the time to do it. But unfortunately, it's something that really is crucial to your success in education. It'll actually make things easy for you as you move forward. I really like this comic here. This is Dilbert. You may or may not know. It's a office comic focused on interactions in a standard office space, and I think that this is a funny example of how people expect a lot of themselves and of others, and actually we need to be a little kinder to ourselves when we're dealing with time management. Although we have to be very honest with ourselves about approaching it and not letting the I don't feel like it get in our way. So why is it important? Why am I encouraging you to manage your time? You will get the most out of your education if you're able to actually set time aside to do the reading, to do the homework, things like that. Not only will you do better in the class, you'll actually learn more. So a lot of people will skimp on reading, for example, because they just don't have the time to do it, or they didn't plan the time to do it. And the reading is assigned for a reason, to help you expand your understanding of whatever concept the professor's exploring. And if you don't do it, you're not going to get as much knowledge and information from your studies. You will perform better. Undoubtedly, this is probably the biggest reason to manage your time, is that you'll actually be able to get decent grades in your classes. If you get way behind on your work, it's very difficult to catch up, or it's very difficult to put in an appropriate amount of effort because you're rushing to complete everything. You will actually have less stress and anxiety. As uncomfortable as it is to maybe sit down and look at your to-do list and actually do the planning, over the long term, you're going to have more relief because you know that you have everything planned. You know that it's written down, that it's on a to-do list. So you're not just worrying with this giant cloud of, I know I have things to do, without actually identifying it or approaching it or tackling it. Your relationships actually may be better. So this might sound strange, but if you manage your time, it also gives you more leeway to spend time with the people that you care about. And you won't feel like you're thinking about something else that you have to do in one of your classes, because you actually have this time set aside to spend with people, and you have much richer interactions with the people that you're with. It also allows you to schedule time for self-care. Many students will let exercise and meditation or any other self-care activities, fun, go out the wayside when they're trying to manage their schooling. But if you really actually plan the time out, you may end up with periods of time where you can actually do this self-care, which is important to your success as a college student. And finally, your ability to focus can improve with, really scheduling in your work, because you're not, worrying about all the things that are due. You actually are just focusing on one thing at a time, because you have it broken up into smaller pieces, and you can really focus instead of, thinking about other things. So one of the first things I suggest to students when they start college, if they haven't already, is to get a planner. There are a few options for you in terms of how you manage and plan your time. You can either get a hard copy planner or something on paper, or you can use a digital option. So for the hard copy planner, I usually suggest that people go to the bookstore at American River College and get the specific planner for American River College, because it includes dates and deadlines related to this particular college, and it's based on a student's semester system. You can buy planners from places like Target, but those tend to be on just sort of a standard year-long schedule and aren't based in the student experience, but of course they can be useful as well. I think, in my opinion, the hard copy planner is a little bit easier to use because it's easier to make edits, it's easier to move things from one day to another, it's easier to use highlighting in different colors and sort of see everything at once in a very accessible way. However, there are a lot of people who prefer digital option. So something like Google Calendar would be an option for helping you plan your work. And these are great because you can get reminders on your phone. It's all accessible easily digitally, and it syncs with your computer. So and even with your email and things like that. So it's a nice option. It's just a little bit harder to edit and make changes. Although there is option for color coding and things like that. So if you prefer digital and you just know that you're not going to keep on top of a paper planner because it's just more writing, go ahead and use the digital option. I would suggest Google Calendar because it's a pretty robust system and there's a lot of options for changing. But there are other things like Outlook Calendar, and you can download some apps to help you with those things if you prefer. Once you have your planner, the first thing you'll do when you start your classes is to take the syllabi from your various classes, or if you're just taking the one syllabus, and you're going to enter that information into your planner. So this will include your homework, your reading, you'll include exams and then time to study for the exams, and day-to-day work like self-care, going to the gym, eating, chores if you need to do chores, and also make sure you have time for fun, because if you don't include that, you are going to be a pretty miserable person. You may have large projects in your classes, and what you really want to do with these large projects is look at the due date, put the due date in, and then break it apart and work backwards from the due date, as long as you have enough information to do that. It may be that your professor won't give you that information about that big project right at the beginning of the semester, but you can still put in sort of a space holder that says work on project. So on the next slide, we're actually going to take some time to do an activity related to that, where you're going to take a 20-page research paper and break it up into a month. So we'll do that in a minute. But first, I want to bring your attention to a snapshot here on the slide of a day in a planner. So different people have different approaches to how they set up their planner. You can do it, sort of minute by minute, hour by hour, where you really structure your entire day. 7 to 7:45, you go to the gym. 8 to 9, you shower and have breakfast. 9:30 to 11 a.m., you go to class, HCD 310. And 11:10 to 12 noon, you study at the library for a political science quiz. So one of the things you'll notice here is there's not an exact, 11 to 11, right? There's time in between these things, and these are for things like travel, right? You are going to need to walk from your class to the library, so there's 10 minutes built in here, or you may need to use the restroom. So putting a little wiggle room into your calendar is smart, because it allows you to be a little bit more realistic about how you set up your time. For other folks, they may not want to do this hour by hour thing and may have sort of more of a to-do list focused calendar, or just sort of a basic structure of what homework needs to be done at what time. So, you might just say, work on intro paragraph for research paper, complete pages, 25 through 50 for psychology, and go to the gym. So you might have more of a to-do list. So it just depends on what works for you. If you really need the structure of the hour by hour thing, that can be very helpful, especially when you're first starting out. You may eventually get to the point where you're in a routine and you don't need to write every single thing. If you use a digital format like Google Calendar, you kind of have to do the hour by hour piece, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that you really follow that exact structure. That can be sort of a de facto to-do list where you just have little pieces reminding you that you need to complete this reading or complete this homework. So I want you to get out the handout, Scheduling a Big Project. And there are instructions on there, but basically you're going to be taking this large paper and breaking it up over that calendar that you see there. And so I'd like you to pause the video and spend some time breaking this thing into manageable bites for you, so that it isn't this big overwhelming project. And this is useful for not just education, it's useful for your life. Sometimes you have this giant list of things to do, and if you look at it as a pile of things, like this pile of rocks that you see on the slide, it feels very overwhelming. Oh my gosh, how am I going to accomplish this? versus if you break it apart into manageable pieces, you can definitely step over these individual rocks to get to the end versus climbing a giant pile of rocks, right? And this allows you to be a little less anxious about it when you get an assignment for a 20-page paper. So go ahead and pause the video, work on the worksheet, and then we'll come back. So scheduling and managing your time is very individual. It's very personal. So you need to have some self-knowledge about what works for you. First of all, what time of day do you study best? Some people work really well in the morning and then need to give themselves a break later in the day. Some people are not morning people and work better in the evening after they've eaten dinner or whatever. So you need to figure something out that you will actually stick to, because if you're trying to force yourself to do all your studying in the morning and you are not a morning person, it probably won't get done, or at least it won't get done at the level that you know you can do. Also, try and figure out a routine. Humans like routine. It makes things easier for us. So try and get up at the same time every day. Try and study around the same time every day. Obviously, it might have to adjust a bit based on your classes and other obligations, but try and make it pretty consistent from week to week at least. And just create something that is manageable. If you're saying you're going to study for 7 hours of time in a big block, that may not really be something that you can maintain, because you might need some breaks. So try and figure something out that's actually realistic for you. So we talked about the smartphone versus a paper version of the planner, but there are some ways to help you sort of more easily access the information and help you keep it organized. So you may want to color code things. So for example, when I created my planner for college, I highlighted all reading assignments in green and all actual homework assignments in pink. And then, if I had something that was due, I would highlight that in blue, for example. So it made it immediately accessible to me to see, oh, I have this thing due. Okay, I need to, make sure I have that in my bag to turn in. Or, oh, it looks like I have this reading, so I can kind of see it quickly. You may also want to include reminders. So this can be written if you use a hard copy planner, or the great thing about Google Calendar is that you can have actual little notification reminders that'll come up on your phone, and you'll hear like a ding, and it'll remind you to do something. So this is a good thing to include, especially if you have something that's coming up and you want to make sure that you are keeping an eye on it. Reminders are very helpful. Another thing you may want to include is checkboxes. So this is next to things that are to do. So for your reading, for example, if you have to read pages 20 through 30, have a checkbox next to it. So just an empty box when you put it into your planner. Then when you complete it, put that check mark in. 1, it feels good to put that check mark in. And 2, if you don't complete it, you need to move it to the next day, and you can put your check mark in, or your checkbox in there, and then mark it off when you actually complete it. So it helps you stay accountable to do these pieces of work that you're going to need to do for your classes. Do be realistic about how long things take. If you say, I'm going to write 7 pages in one day of a very complicated research project, that may not happen. That may not be realistic, particularly if you have other obligations, or maybe you struggle a bit with writing. And what will happen is you'll get discouraged, and it'll start piling up these things you have to move to other days to complete. And, it may be that you have no other wiggle room for those 7 pages because you overplanned other days. And that just makes it so the time management approach doesn't really work. It may take you time to figure out how long things take. So, be flexible with your planner once you're first starting out, figuring out how to manage your time. You might be a person who works really well in long chunks of time where you don't like interruptions and you need to kind of be in the zone and really focused on one thing for a while, but other people need breaks. So you need to chunk it out between different things. So, putting other things in like self-care or eating or exercise or maybe a class in between your actual studying might be appropriate for you. One other thing you want to remember is there are these little bits of time in between classes. Sometimes you're stuck on campus, and you have, you know, a half hour or an hour between your classes. So it's silly for you to go home, but you have this time. Take advantage of these times where you are, you know, stuck to do some studying. Go to the library. I will tell you that that was huge for me. When I had gaps between my classes in college, I would just always go to a computer lab or a library, and I would get a lot of work done there, and then I would have more free time for myself at home. So take advantage of that. Other things, if you take the bus or other public transportation, do your reading on the bus. If you go to the gym, you might want to read while you're on the treadmill. You know, assuming you can really comprehend while you're exercising. Some people have a hard time with that. So there are ways to sort of put things in and fill in little gaps of time that you get a surprising amount done that saves you some time later on in the day. So here's an example of what it would look like to have a planner that's not a minute-to-minute breakdown, but has major assignments and projects, and then the to-do list that I mentioned earlier. So starting with your big overall academic goals and due dates, you're going to go in and include those throughout the semester on your planner, and then break them apart, as I mentioned, and as we practice with the activity. So the to-do list is really great because this is where you have these actionable tasks, and you can get these done, check them off, and if you don't finish them, move to the next day. So you see this example here where it says meet with your team for your group project. So that's not really a to-do list item, that's something you need to get done that day. And then you have chapter 4 reading due, so something that's due here. So again, not something that's on your to-do list, but you just need to know that, oh, this is when I need to have this done. Also, journal entry number 4 is due, so you're keeping on top of all of those due dates. Then the actual items you need to do are right here. So, you know, begin your reading, and it's not just the entire chunk of reading, it's begin the reading, and they broke it up into a smaller bit. Pages 51 through 63 instead of read chapter 5. It's getting more specific and making it more manageable. Complete PowerPoint slides 1 through 6 for the group project. Not do PowerPoint or complete PowerPoint. It actually breaks it into small pieces and is specific. You're more likely to do it if you have a specific goal or a specific objective, as we've learned. And finally, you know, do laundry. That doesn't have to be a specific. It's not like do the whites. Well, actually, if you need it to be more specific, you know, do dark laundry, and then you do white laundry the next day. You know, you break it into as smaller pieces as you need to be able to manage it and make it so you'll actually do it. So as a student, you're going to have a lot of demands on your time, and this is going to make it important that you learn how to prioritize. So when dealing with assignments for your class, you'll want to focus on the ones that have upcoming due dates or are more difficult for you, so that you know you have the time to actually focus on getting those done, or maybe things that have a larger point value. So let's say you have two things that are due on the same day, and one's worth 50 points and one's worth 10. You may want to focus on the one that's worth more points. And obviously, ideally, you would get everything done, but sometimes you need to start with the things that are more difficult, and the other things that you will hopefully get done, you may not have to spend as much time on, or if the quality is not quite as high, it's not as big of a deal. But ideally, your planner would allow you to finish everything. But this is the real world, so you have to understand that sometimes, certain things have to get done and other things might have to be compromised. A really important thing with prioritization and with just time management in general is that your values and your time should be aligned. So one of the assignments, the 24-hour time log, you're actually going to be asked to look at your time really clearly and see how you actually spend your time, because a lot of us don't realize how much time we waste and how much time we spend on things we don't care about. And you want to think about what your values are. What do you really care about? Do you care about getting your education more than you care about getting likes on Facebook? Then you should spend more time on your education than you do on Facebook, for example. So it is important that you're aware of what your values are, what's really important to you, and then you are realistic and honest about how you're spending your time in accordance with your values. Learn to say no. People are going to ask you to do things, and you have to figure out what's really important to you. And if there are things that are getting in the way of the things that you value, you might have to say no to people. That's hard for a lot of people, particularly when it's your friends and they're inviting you to something fun. But if you have a final exam coming up, you're going to have to learn how to say, I'm definitely in for next time, but I have a final exam coming up and I'm just going to have to spend some time studying. And this is for other things as well. Sometimes you'll be asked to do something that's less fun, but somebody's putting pressure on you. So maybe your boss says, hey, we have these extra shifts. I'd really, really appreciate it if you could come in. You may not be able to 100% say no to your boss, but you can at least try and say, I have a final coming up. I really need time to study. Is there any possibility that you could check with some of the other staff and then come back to me if you really can't get anybody? And that's a way of managing sort of these different power relationships and these other priorities that you do have in your life. So are your priorities and commitments realistic? I mean, you are probably a person who might have a job. You also have friends and family to spend time on, other activities like sports or extracurriculars, clubs that you're involved in, volunteer work, housework, and exercise. Sometimes it's really hard to do all of these, or maybe you're dedicating a lot of time to one of these and you really might need to just kind of move back on that and sort of reduce the time you spend. Sometimes students will engage in a large amount of hours at work and it's at the detriment of their academics. So they may need to really look at, okay, can I actually handle working 30 hours a week when the requirement is about 2 hours a week per unit, and so I should be spending about 36 hours a week on my studying, and then I have another 30 hours of work. That's a 60 hours of work. That seems a little overwhelming for me. I definitely don't have time for self-care or anything else. So maybe seeing if you can reduce your hours at work, for example, or maybe your unit load that you're taking. So be really honest with yourself and really look at your time and figure out, maybe there are some things that you have to reduce a bit. And sometimes that's not comfortable, but, we only have a certain amount of time per day. And we have to figure out how we want to allocate that. So I want you guys to take a minute, pause the video, to look at this and to jot down some notes on whether you think this is a good schedule or not. So go ahead and pause the video and jot down some notes. Okay, welcome back. So did you think this was a good schedule? I would say that it's not a great schedule. It needs some fixing. First of all, you can see that it's pretty vague. So it'll say things like work on this project or catch up on homework. Well, what part of your homework? What exactly do you need to catch up on? What specific tasks or reading or papers or whatever needs to be completed? The other thing you'll see is that they do not have any time for travel. So they have work till 5 and then they have their biology class from 5 to 7. They're going to be perpetually late for that class unless they work right in the same classroom as the biology class. So they need to make sure that they're factoring in time for travel. The other thing you'll see is there's not a lot of information about any other self-care pieces. When they're eating, when they're exercising, they do have a little bit of enjoyable things to be involved in, like their mom's birthday party, but it doesn't include a lot of other self-care items. Maybe there are other things you noticed about it that could be improved, or other things you noticed that you really liked. But I think the main thing that this student would need to do here is be more specific and break their assignments into smaller pieces, and also to allow time for travel and self-care. Procrastination is a very, very common problem for people, and there are a lot of ways that a lot of forms that procrastination takes. So sometimes we'll ignore the task and hope that it goes away. It's not going to go away. Sometimes we'll underestimate how long it takes. So we actually do plan for it, but we don't plan enough time. Sometimes we overestimate our abilities and resources. So I think this is only going to take me a couple hours. I'm really good at this, but it actually will take longer. You need to reach out to somebody to get some help, and that takes some time. Telling yourself that poor performance is okay. It doesn't really matter if I do well in this, and I'll just start it later. And that's, sort of trying to self-soothe, when we're actually uncomfortable with the fact that we haven't started a project, but it ends up with, a detrimental effects on us that we don't actually do well on the paper or the project. Doing something else that's not very important. How many of you have said, oh man, I'm going to have to clean my entire office before I can do my homework because it just feels like it needs to be clean before I do it. And yeah, it is nice to have a clean space to work in, but you're really kind of doing it because you don't want to start a new project. So focusing on something else is not important, especially these ones that feel like you're getting something else done, can be really negative because, look up an hour and a half later, your office is spotless, but you haven't gotten your homework done. Believing that minor delays won't hurt you. If I just watch one episode of the show, it's not going to be a big deal. I'm going to be able to finish it. A half hour is quite a lot of time that you can focus on your studies. And if your minor delays add up, that can really become a large chunk of time. Talking about a hard job rather than doing it. Sometimes when we talk about doing something, it feels like we already did it, but we didn't. And talking about it also takes time that we could be working on it. So, sometimes we'll kind of complain to our friend about a project for a long period of time. Well, maybe we could just focus on that project and actually start getting it done. Putting all your work into one part of the task. So sometimes we will focus a lot on one thing. So for example, let's say you have a research project and you spend weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks doing research. You start having huge lists of potential citations and sources that you're going to use. And then, oh, shoot, I don't have any time to actually write the paper. So you want to make sure that, that your planner can come in handy with this. You give yourself limited amounts of time to focus on certain things, assuming you have enough time to actually complete it, but you don't let yourself continue researching forever and never write the paper, for example. So, do divide your time appropriately between different sections of projects or assignments. Finally, many of us become paralyzed when we have to make choices. So sometimes when we have a task, we actually have to make a decision about that task. So using a research paper as an example again, coming up with a topic. So you might go, well, yeah, what if this topic ends up being harder than I thought? Or what if there's a better topic out there? And not being able to make a decision makes it so you cannot move forward and cannot start working on the actual project. So, try to be decisive. It's hard for a lot of people, but if you can say, okay, by this deadline, I'm going to have a decision made for this topic, and you really stick to it, that will help you. Gives you a little bit of time to kind of go back and forth, but you have a deadline by which you have to make a decision. Some solutions to help you with procrastination. One is to make a to-do list. So we talked about doing this in our planner. So this is helpful, or you can always make a separate to-do list if you like that. Google actually has kind of a nice to-do list option in their Sheets app with little check boxes you can use, or you can just do it right there in your planner, which is what I would suggest. Self-bribery actually can help. So you say, okay, I'm going to do, 10 pages of reading, then I'm allowed to watch my TV show. Or I'm going to do, 3 pages of my paper, and then I can call my friend and chat. So giving yourself that reward at the end, first of all, makes it so you don't do that just to procrastinate, call your friend or whatever. But it also creates this nice thing to look forward to when you're done. I've said this a couple times in this, but breaking larger tasks into smaller units. Sometimes when we look at a project, we get very overwhelmed, like that big pile of rocks, right? And if you break it into smaller things, it'll make it so you actually feel like you can tackle it. And then, once you complete that small task, move to the next one. There's this great rule called the 10-minute rule, and if this is the only thing you remember this, because this works really well. Say, I'm just going to do this for 10 minutes. And what's going to happen is it feels more manageable, first of all, and you're not like, oh, I have to do this for hours upon hours. You just do it for 10 minutes, and you sit down, you start doing it, and for most of the time, you will actually work way past 10 minutes because you're like, okay, I'm in, let's just go, right? It's like jumping into a pool you're always scared to get in because you're worried it's going to be cold. And then once you're in, it's actually a lot of fun, and it feels really good as your body adjusts to it, right? The 10-minute rule can really help you too with things like exercise. Sometimes I really don't want to exercise today. Okay, I'm just going to walk for 10 minutes. You start walking for 10 minutes, you end up working for a half hour. So it's a very helpful tip to sort of trick your mind into working on something, because it's the beginning, it's the first step that's often the hardest. Perfect is the enemy of progress. Understanding this can help a lot of procrastinators. So some procrastinators won't start on it because they're afraid they're going to fail. It's about self-doubt. And understanding that nobody's perfect, you can't be perfect, that turning something in is better than turning nothing in, even if that something isn't perfect. So just saying, okay, I'm going to do this just good enough. I'm just going to do a draft of this. And then doing the draft, you probably will add some improvements to it and things like that. But just by allowing yourself to not have to make it perfect, it makes it so it's less scary to start it. Another little trick is to do one more thing. So just add on one more little task after you've completed whatever the main thing you're working on is. And this really can help you get ahead of the schedule, get ahead of your own planner, and it feels really good. And also, if you always just adding on one more thing, it starts to, again, kind of break big things into bite-sized pieces, and you're going to make this sort of incremental but significant progress on things if you just add that little extra at the end of your assignments when you're the ones that you plan for. So I mentioned this earlier, but use your in-between time. So those big gaps in between your classes. If you have somebody coming over to visit with you and they are a little bit late, pick up your textbook and read, or maybe edit your paper, or do things that are easy to drop but allow you to complete things. And those, find a space on campus where you can go when you have a break, because this really will help you get things done. Commit out loud. So sometimes when we say that we're going to do something, it makes it so we feel like we've already done it. But if we say it to somebody else and say, I'm going to get this done by this time, will you, check in on me with that? So if you add that check-in piece, it can really be helpful, because then you feel that you're committed to doing it because somebody's going to check on you. So you're basically accountable to this other person that you shared with. Sometimes multitasking is appropriate. Studies have shown that most multitasking is actually detrimental to productivity, and it makes it so your learning isn't as good because your brain can't do two things at once. The only time that I suggest doing multitasking is when one of the things is mindless. So this could be when you're walking on a treadmill, or, I really like mindful eating and, really focusing on your food, but for some people, they don't really care about that. So, reading the textbook while they eat is fine. So there are many things that you should not do two things at once, like do not watch TV while you're trying to do your homework. It will take you twice as long and you will not comprehend what you've been working on. But, walking on a treadmill doesn't take a whole lot of brain power, so you probably could read your textbook while you do that. Less is more. Set small goals. Small goals are important. So this relates again to breaking things into smaller pieces, but small goals will feel much more manageable for you. And finally, do it first. So if you have a big to-do list or you have other things you want to do, just do the hard thing first, because then you'll have it out of the way and everything after that will feel easier. In our current society, we have a lot of distractions and a lot of things that will waste our time. So many of the things that we spend time on, things like our phone, video games, social media, and television and Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu, right? We have so many options now, are actually designed to be addictive. They're designed to keep your eyes on them, to grab you and steal your time. So you need to figure out a way to manage these things, because it's not 100% your fault that you can't get off your phone. It's not 100% your fault that you keep scrolling through Facebook, but it is 100% your responsibility to make sure that the day doesn't go away with you just scrolling through all day, and you lose all that time you needed to focus on your studying. So the first thing I'm going to have you do is to take a time wasters assessment. So you have that handout. Go ahead and take a minute to fill that out and identify what time wasters actually get in your way, because it is different from person to person. So go ahead and pause the video and do that. Okay, welcome back. So I'm wondering what time wasters you guys identified, and I'm wondering if you can look at those and see if the things you spend your time on align with your values and align with the things that you want to achieve in your life or just in your week. And if they do not align with your values or the things you want to achieve, can you reduce those things? Can you eliminate those things? If they're not that important, is there a way to adjust the amount of time you spend on them? So some other ways to identify and avoid time wasters: make sure you study in a quiet space where you're going to be left alone. Sometimes people are time wasters. If you have a chatty roommate or a chatty colleague or something like that, making sure you have a space where you can close the door, and make yourself less accessible, or maybe, you have animals that kind of distract you and make it so it takes longer for you to finish your work. So trying to find a space that works for you. If your house doesn't allow for that, if you have somebody who shares a room with you or something like that, find a space on campus. The library and computer labs are all available to you to use. Turn off your phone. When it is time to study or it's time to do assignments, turning off your phone will take away that very addicting and tempting option of spending time on your phone. And also, the reason I say turn it off versus maybe turn it on vibrate or something like that is, even if you hear a vibrate or any notification, studies have shown that it shifts your focus, and it takes you so much more time to get back into the work that you're doing, and it just makes it a lot harder for you to get things done. Do not study in front of the TV. As I said, it will take you twice as long, and you really won't absorb it. I used to do that, actually. I used to say, well, it's fun, it's fun to have the TV on, so at least I have something that's, enjoyable going on while I'm doing this homework that I don't really like. Or, I actually used to do that when I was grading your guys' work, and I would notice that it would take me hours when it should only take me about a half hour to complete. So I stopped doing that, and then if I want to, I reward myself with TV afterwards. So I say, well, I'll get this fun piece, but it actually works out better because then I can focus on the TV alone and actually enjoy it more, and I focus on my work alone and actually get it done faster. So it's not a good idea to study in front of the television. Other things, so many of us will study or take, an online class on our computer, and even if our phone is off, we have access to social media, YouTube, etc. There are ways to disable your social media accounts. You can either do it temporarily through the social media platform, or you can download an app that blocks your social media sites temporarily. So Cold Turkey and Self Control are two apps you might want to look into. I have the links right there, so you can just look it up, getcoldturkey.com or selfcontrolapp.com, and these will sort of put these periods of time where you can't access these social media accounts for a while, and then of course you can just turn them right back on when you're done studying. So as I said, they are addicting. They want to draw you in, so it's helpful to have these tools to support you in not getting drawn in by that. So here's some lists of time wasters to say no to. So you all, took the assessment, so you saw some time wasters that get in your way, but there are some additional ones here. So I'll let you go ahead and read through those. And if you notice that you do some of these a lot, take a note. Try and maybe eliminate these habits from your day-to-day, and that'll allow you to have more time to focus on the things that really matter, like your education, your friends, your family, your self-care. So just to look at the reality of the time, many people feel like they just never have enough time. And with all the things that we focus on, that's actually probably true. With the amount of time we spend on, our normal activities like work and education, and then add on top of that, our media-related activities and, other things like that, it does feel like we don't have enough time. But We actually have about 110 hours of time spent in the classroom, sleeping and on self-care. So the breakdown here is if you're taking 16 units, that's 16 hours a week. And then 5 hours a day of self-care. So those things like showering, eating, doing your hair, those kinds of things. And then assuming 8 hours of rest per night. That's 110 hours per week. And then if you have a job, it might take up another 14 plus hours. Ideally, you're not going way past 14 hours a week while you're taking a full load of classes. So we're going to assume about 14 hours a week. So if you add all of that up, it leaves about 44 waking hours left per week that are unaccounted for. And this is 6 hours a day. So that's actually quite a lot of time. And many people are surprised to learn that, to say, oh, what? 6 hours, really? And if you are surprised, it's good to track your time and see how you actually spend it. And you may be, again, surprised to see how much time you spend on things that are completely useless. Some of this time, you spend doing things that are fun and enriching, like going out with your friends or, seeing some art or, connecting with other people. But a lot of people spend a lot of this time on things that aren't really necessary. So, really being mindful of where you focus your energy and your time is going to really help you find opportunities to dedicate to studying and other things that are more meaningful, like connecting with people you care about. In conclusion, no one expects you to actually spend all of your free time on your academics. However, it's reasonable that you're going to spend about 2 to 3 hours per unit. That's what's expected. So half or a little more of your 44 hours will be spent on studying outside of class. Using the tools and techniques that we've talked about today will allow you to be more successful both while you're working on your studying, but also allow you to have more time for the things that you care about, like connecting with other people and self-care and enrichment in your life. So use the tools that we've focused on today, things like getting a planner, figuring out the time of day you work and study best, prioritizing your tasks, making sure that you eliminate time wasters as much as possible, saying no when things come up that aren't as important as your academics or something else important in your life. And then that will allow you to be more successful as a college student. So thank you for your time and have a good one.